Well, as Country Joe McDonald said, "Whoopee, we're all gonna die." It is really interesting to watch. This morning at 2 o'clock in the morning, as I was listening to BBC, they ran the U.S. ABC News broadcast, and the amount of hyperbole and fear being spread. I listened this morning before we started recording this to last night's Rachel Maddow show, and she's doing a really good job of explaining how the virus works in the body and the protocols that need to happen. But John Stewart, I think, said it best the other night when he said, "Look, you're not going to catch Ebola." But yet we've got this Fox News fear mongering. They wanted to quarantine everybody. One of the anchors actually said, "We're going to have to start quarantining people with Ebola in quarantine camps." And we all saw how well that worked in 1942 with the Japanese camps. Where does the insanity end, gentlemen?
Well, I mean, my big issue about it, I mean, I'm sorry to bang on about this, is that it's an incredible tragedy for parts of Africa. I mean, 4,500 people have died in Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone. And we get a couple of cases in America and in Spain. And the media goes crazy.
Yeah.
And it's gone bonkers. And that to me speaks of, just how, Euro and developed world centric we are. I mean,
Yeah,
it's appalling, really.
I was going to say exactly the same thing, and I think it's very true that our sort of Eurocentric worldviews, you put it there, Phil, it doesn't just equate to Ebola. It's also on things like climate change and on poverty. In the West, we seem to be completely and utterly myopic and narrow, and shows our own kind of morality only really begins and ends at our own borders, at our own doors.
Yeah.
And my dad, I mean, had a very good phrase because he used to say, for example, there was, aid should begin at home. Aid should be where it's needed most. And that's absolutely right. I mean, we shouldn't think in terms of our own borders only. We should think about other people around the world, who are dying of these things. And obviously, it's a terrible tragedy in America and in Spain and all the rest of it. But, it's relatively small there.
Not only relatively small. I mean, there's a couple of issues that have jumped up at me. I mean, yesterday, even though I was working in London all day, I would have these news alerts popping up all day long on my iPad. So it was almost like you're still plugged into the outside world when the top bar comes in and says, Dow is down 417 points. That all of the indices are taking a financial hit over fears of Ebola and a global slowdown. I mean, there was even one that said that all of the airline stocks were down anywhere between 4 and 7% of their market value because of the fear that passengers would no longer fly. When I got on the train last night to come back home, on my Facebook timeline, somebody, I don't even remember who it was, who lives in Ohio, says the nurse traveled by plane to Ohio, so she brought it here. Thank you. We're all going to die. I mean, it just is, it beggars belief that people can be that stupid on the one hand, yet you look at how badly a first world health system has bungled this in this Dallas hospital. There was this morning on the BBC on Five Live when I was driving back, or there was, I'm sorry, it was not on Five Live. It was actually on the Maddow show. I was listening to her podcast, and they were saying that the material that was used to treat the gentleman who actually died, his waste, his vomit, his diarrhea, was literally piled to the ceiling in a room, which was theoretically then exposing anybody who walked by. So, which begs the question, why wasn't this all quarantined and handled professionally and destroyed? And the general conclusion is that this Dallas hospital, which would not be difficult or different, excuse me, from other hospitals, doesn't have the capabilities to handle Ebola at this point.
I mean, there's an issue around this whole screening thing, isn't there? I mean, how do they equate and counter the fact that presumably there's a sort of incubation period for this disease?
There's an incubation period, but you're not contagious until you're symptomatic. Once you're symptomatic, then that starts a whole time frame of about 11 days. And Matt did a really good job last night of saying, 1 to 4 days you have a fever. 4 to 7, it starts to attack the body's internal systems. And if you don't get better by about day 7 or day 8, you start this slide. And but even the guy that she interviewed, the doctor said, there's not any blood really associated with it. That's the one thing they wanted to spell. Most people die of dehydration.
Yeah.
They die of the dehydration caused by diarrhea and vomiting. And so that's that as well as...
There's a lot of fear involved, unknown fear of the details. It's a similar analogy to the way in the early 80s we had all this stuff about AIDS, and there was a lot of unknown stuff. And people would be frightened and scared about things that they shouldn't have been frightened and scared about.
I think this is also affecting kind of like the decision-making process, because it's all about perception, really, isn't it? And both in America and in Britain, particularly in terms of airports and screening. So that there was advice given that screening at airports basically is going to do nothing whatsoever because of the incubation period. But the government has started saying that they're going to start doing that from particular flights. I think it was Heathrow was saying they're talking about moving it to Gatwick, and doctors are saying that that's absolutely pointless. And then there was an interview I saw on Fox News where one of the nothing kind of presenters was saying we need to lock down the USA and cancel all flights, and the doctors kind of like, well, it's not going to make any difference. And the presenter was just going, yeah, but we need to lock down. And it just didn't compute. Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. In case you didn't understand it, I'm going to say it a third time. We need to lock down. Yeah.
It's like lock down the whole country. Like that, that's really going to happen.
Irrational fear, though, is really what's going here.
Absolutely.
I mean, this whole idea of, it was a bit of a joke to play that number at the start just before the break, but so many people are worried about this. Yet, if you look at the fact that 52,000 people last year in the United States died from the flu,
Yeah.
and that's far more contagious, and yet that's something you can do something about with a flu vaccine. But you get these nutters out there that are refusing to take any vaccines or vaccinate their children. So we've got the return of polio and smallpox and all, well, not smallpox, but all these diseases that were eradicated have this high likelihood of coming back.
It's something to do with the kind of irrational nature of the media, actually. And the way news, and I speak about this with some experience, the news will fix something, like in this case Ebola, but it doesn't have any, there's no perspective, in relation to other diseases or other things, other issues, and that's not the only case. I mean, there have been in fact, that's what news is about, fixing on things which may or may not be of interest.
It's I mean, I hate to say this, but it's kind of entertainment as well. It's like, like you said it last week, Dennis, it's Ebola. It sounds like a disaster, Hollywood disaster movie. And that sort of reproduction of fear is something that kind of sells news, and if you said, well, if you put on the loop, there are 52,000 people died of flu last year, every half an hour on 24-hour rolling news. People will be like, well, this isn't very interesting, but that, obviously that's more significant than in the West than the effect of Ebola at this point.
I saw this picture of a typical Fox News viewer. It's a cartoon, with the word Ebola above him, and then underneath him it said, 550,000 people will die this year because of obesity, and another several thousand will die because of heart disease, and another, all these different things. And yet we're focused on something that has 2 known cases. I mean, again, I have to go back to Nigeria. They had 2 cases. They shut it down. I'm not even sure the United States can shut it down because of their cavalier attitude, and nobody's going to tell me what to do about anything. I mean, it should be something you should be able to get under control very, very quickly.
It's extraordinary.